Arcus, 9966. I've discovered more stories by Barra that feature an esoteric character called the Prisoner. Like the other stories, the prisoner is trapped in a dark and strange dimension from which he is desperately trying to escape. Barra's stories, especially the ones written later on in his career, focus heavily on this dimension which he calls the horror. He describes it as the dimension where all horror originates. An interesting idea, but flawed in so many ways. Arcus, 9970. I found a series by Barra called Tales from the Horror. Hundreds of stories about people trapped in the horror, most of them trying to escape, others acting as servants of the darkness. I found one story detailing how an unlikely squad of survivors created an opening into the void, with a sequence of symbols discovered on a scroll.
Okay, so looking at Aurella's bio, her and her friend Emily were huge fans of Sable's podcast. Yeah, that's Sable. And according to the lore, Alex disappeared into the fog. Cliff found a way to get into the fog, and he rescued Alex. But Alex returned, and Cliff did not, and nothing good happened to Cliff either, because whatever was in the fog was trying to turn Alex into one of the killers.
The storyteller pulled out a coffee-stained notebook and opened it to a story that she still had entitled. She took a deep, calming breath and began. This story doesn't have a title, but I'm thinking of calling it The Tragedy of Cliff and Alex, who were real people and who disappeared before most of us were born. Now, I'm not one to believe in conspiracy theories or urban legends, but their story, which I acquired through extensive interviews and research, opened my mind to the possibility that there is more to our lives than that which can be seen or proven. The skeptic quipped. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? The storyteller ignored his comment and continued. Cliff Barra always loved horror movies. He started making scary movies when his father bought him his first Super 8 camera. And so it comes to no surprise that he grew up to be a famous director who translated his favorite Gothic novels and horror stories to the silver screen. It's also no surprise that when he met Alex Demaro, an equally famous art director known for his brilliant and visionary production sets and costume designs, that they were instantly smitten with one another. Together, it's safe to say, they produced some of the scariest and most iconic films to date. But all this changed when Alex suddenly disappeared while on set. In a rolling cloud of black fog the crew insisted they had not designed. So he returned to the haunted movie set where Alex disappeared, and waited, and waited. He waited for days, until finally he heard Alex's laughter. And with the laughter came the fog. And the fog rolled in and carried him away. And so Cliff ended up in another world that defied his wildest nightmares. He followed Alex's voice through a darkness that had never known the light of day. At last, he came upon a forest of wooden stakes bearing skewered heads. He picked his way through the stakes, inspecting each head. The scene reminded him of one of the first films he had made as a teenager. He soon came to one head that resembled an old producer friend of his. Suddenly the eyes sprang open, and Cliff started. At once all the heads came alive, taunting and ridiculing him like he had been ridiculed as a child for his passions and hobbies. But Cliff stayed the course despite the insults and the taunts that he would never see Alex again. One head of the thousands shouted louder than the rest. The head screamed that Alex was being corrupted and that he should turn back before it was too late. Realizing this severed head knew more than the rest, Cliff kicked the stake and caught the head as it toppled off. The head protested and yelled that it had once been a king, and it didn't want to be in the hands of a commoner. And Cliff promised the king he would release him after, and only after, he helped him find Alex. Long story short, the head led Cliff to the edge of a massive gate that surrounded a town that resembled every production set Alex had ever designed for Cliff. Before he could take in the area, he suddenly heard Alex screaming in the distance. The king warned Cliff not to interfere with the process, and explained that Alex was being twisted and tortured into a brutal, murdering monster for reasons they would never understand. But Cliff couldn't bear to hear Alex suffer. Every agonizing scream was a dagger in his heart, and so, dropping the head, he climbed over the gate and, unperturbed by the formless creatures moving in the fog, he followed the cries to the top of the castle he recognized from his Frankenstein film. Cliff charged up the winding stairs to the roof, where he found Alex agonizing on a metal table as bolts of lightning struck him every few moments from a thick, black storm cloud. All around him in glass prisons, filled with formaldehyde, were all the monsters Alex had ever designed since he was a child. Cliff couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was as if this living nightmare were all a projection of their combined memories. Cliff didn't even try to understand what was happening or what he was experiencing. Without hesitation, he rushed up to Alex, not knowing what to do. In the shadows, he spotted an axe on the cobblestone floor and instantly grabbed it. Then, despite the deadly lightning, he pushed through the sizzling and sparking pain to smash the chains that bound Alex to the table. Alex opened his half-conscious eyes with difficulty. He barely recognized Cliff. Alex squinted with charred eyelids and managed to murmur words that made Cliff smile. Then Cliff hefted Alex over his shoulders and charged down the stairs and out into the thickening fog, where frantic, formless creatures did all they could to prevent them from escaping. Cliff kicked, punched, and charged through the fog, smashing through creatures, crows, and claws, everything and anything the world set against him. He remembered the king telling him something about a hatch. The hatch would somehow lead to freedom. Desperately, Cliff searched the ground as he heard a roar followed by a clap of thunder. Pounding steps chased him through the darkness. He didn't even bother to look back. He rushed forward until he saw it, the glint of metal by a crumbling gargoyle statue from one of his movies. He ran to the hatch, opened it, and lowered Alex to safety. Then, just as he was about to descend, something sharp like talons clutched his ankles and pulled him screaming into the raging fog. I'd like to say that it all worked out in the end, and that they lived happily ever after. But that's not the truth of this story. The truth is, Cliff took Alex's place at the torturer's table, and was turned into a perfect champion of horror with little or no memory of who he was, or how he ended up in this dark realm. And Alex, well, he ended up with a group of stranded souls who did whatever they could just to survive. But that's another story for another time.
Alex survived the horrors of war and infused his macabre sets and costumes with a palpable sense of dread. So he used the stuff that he saw in the fog and brought it back and infused it into the movies and stories. I notice in the lore it tries to make us understand that every crazy, scary, creepy horror thing that you have seen in a movie or read in a book, it actually exists somewhere. It might not be in your world, or your dimension, but it exists. So when I say dimension, I'm going to be using it interchangeably with the word terror, terror world, dimension, same thing. Okay.
Hey!
Relax.
Have you seen all this?
What do you mean?
Have you seen what Augustine's been doing? Something's wrong. Like, very, very wrong.
Arcus, 9,969. There is no such thing as fiction. Everything is based on some reality somewhere.